Welcome, relational leaders and listeners. This is Cultivate, your podcast destination where we celebrate thriving relational leaders and encourage each other along the influence journey. I am Wendy F. Adams, your host and strategic guide. In each episode, I will engage with leaders who are sharing authentic stories that support impactful influence. I believe work shouldn't be a four-letter word, but should inspire, challenge, and fulfill. Through a high challenge and high support model, we will explore the recipe for relational leadership that drives meaningful change. You will gain insights from leaders who face the same challenges you may encounter and discover strategies to navigate them with resilience and purpose. Lindsey Holland is the Senior Director of Human Resources and Community Engagement with MAP International since 2018 and serves as an active member of the leadership team. Her approach to human resources is to build people systems that both maximizes the impact of MAP International's mission, as well as benefits the employees' lives and their career. Lindsey attended Birmingham Southern College in Birmingham, Alabama, where she earned her BA in political science. Later, she earned her PHR and SHRM CP credentials, as well as a certification from Cornell University for strategic leadership. Lindsey is also a certified trainer for DISC and Fierce Conversations. As a diversified human, Lindsey is an avid runner, self-described foodie, loves being a mom and wife, an active member of her local church, and would rather be in the mountains on a trail more than anywhere else. Lindsey firmly believes that human resources done with excellence is a value-added function to a business and not just a cost center. If you're seeking healthy leadership engagement in an open, empowering, and authentic environment, then you're in the right place. After all, as leaders, we're either driving progress or we're driving the problem. So let's grow together. Well, welcome back for another episode of Cultivate, a catalyst for healthy leadership engagement. I'm your host, Wendy F. Adams, founder and CEO of Cultivate for Good. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming another thriving relational leader that's making a lasting impact. Welcome, Lindsey Holland, Senior Director of HR from MAP International, to the Cultivate experience.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I'm glad to be here.
It's an exciting day. I've been looking forward to this since our first conversation, and I know that the guests will be equally excited. Lindsey, our time together today will move so quickly. Mm-hmm. So I just want to jump in. And you and I had this conversation a bit, but to share with the audience a little background on your role and what MAP International does to serve your community.
Sure, absolutely, Wendy. So MAP International is over 70 years old, and we have been in the mission of acquiring and distributing medicines and medical supplies since 1954. And we work with our NGO partners on the ground to identify what the needs are around the globe. And in 2024, MAP served over 92 countries, including the United States. And we have been distributing close to $1 billion worth of medical supplies and pharmaceuticals in the last several years. And that is through the generous donations of our pharmaceutical corporate partners, as well as non-pharma partners as well. And we have a very small team of just around 60 staff that make that possible. And so my role is to help equip the organization for those people systems so that both the individuals themselves find themselves developing and growing within their own careers and skill sets, and at the same time developing systems that help equip and further the mission of MAP International. And so I've overseen a variety of the areas for, I guess, the first 4 to 5 years. I was an HR department of one with some very robust vendors that helped make that possible. The team has grown. I've got a staff of 4 on my people team at this stage. And some of that is for our community engagement function as well as our HR function. And so we do everything from volunteerism to helping do outreach to community organizations, as well as the people functions such as hiring, employee development, engagement, and payroll benefits, compensation, compliance, and then the strategic leadership function. I do sit on our senior leadership team as well, report to our CEO and support him to help understand how our talent can help further the organization's mission. So brief overview, and happy to delve into any of those areas that are of interest.
Well, first of all, just let's say, wow, right? When you just hear what MAP, how long they've been around, what they're doing, and then you talk about a team of 60,
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of mission that's happening for not a lot of people.
Agreed.
And then you talk about your team. So, that in and of itself really, I think, is what's mind blowing. And we're going to dig in a little bit on how that actually takes place, right? We know that it's critical, like all stakeholders, which includes our staff. It's got to be clear what the why is. And you touched on like what the why is and the vision of an organization. You're asking them to champion that, right? So we know board members, and we know that those that we serve, and we know that our supporters with their time, talent, and treasure, that they need to be able to understand, but the internal team needs to be able to understand that why. Yeah. Share some of the insight that you have, that your personal alignment and your why, how does that come together, and how do you translate that out to the team of MAP International?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think I'd love to start with the why for the organization. MAP is a faith-based organization. We're a Christian nonprofit, and the why for us has been clear from the time that we were founded. It was originally a part of Christian Medical Society, and the founder spun it off after it was a program of that other organization. And so he was very intentional about making sure that the why was carried forward into the spinoff. And as MAP became its own organization and function, and every leader since then has ensured. And we took up the mantle of Matthew 25:36 of I was sick and therefore you looked after me. And that's, spread all over our website. It's posted, on the walls in our building. And, then it has been, I guess, explained even in more depth through our company values and vision. And we've really tried to bake that into every stage of the employee life cycle so that it doesn't feel like corporate speak. They see it lived out. And then recently we actually took that concept of values and elevated it to include a different set of competencies and values for our leaders, our people leaders, so that it is very clear, no matter where we are in the organization and what we're doing, that there is an expectation that we're living out that why, right? And that it is something that is encountered and felt and seen and walked at every stage of the process, and that we are holding ourselves accountable to that as well. Right. It's so easy to lose that why if you aren't reminded in the day-to-day activities of what that North Star is, right? And so it's so critical that in the work that I do, that you take something that feels so intangible and put shape and structure to it, so that it is something that people experience throughout the time that they work with us. So for me, where I see my personal values and my personal why lived out is that I've had the opportunity to come into my space and in the function that I have to see the people function as a very strategic and value added function. I have been a believer since my earliest days in HR that this is not a cost center. What I do is a facilitator of the mission and the success of an organization, and that if I do my role well, that the strategies that I develop amplify everything else that the forward-facing functions do. So whether it's fundraising or it's partnership development or whatever those outward-facing functions are, if I don't do my job well, then their efficiencies and effectiveness drop dramatically. So for me, it's about making sure that how I live into my role is elevating that position. I've been given the leverage from our C-suite to do exactly that. So I think that the reason that translates back to values, to kind of center back, Wendy, to what you were asking originally, is that if I didn't feel that the executive team was supportive of my ability to elevate individuals and process at the same time, and that they weren't receptive of a strategic function of HR, then to me, it would be crossing a value line for me. I wouldn't have the opportunity to speak into how we leverage talent, and it would become a very transactional function. And to me, that would be severely contradictory to how I see our function. So hopefully that answers your question. But
Absolutely. Well, because you made the tie between vision, why we do, mission, how you walk that out, the what, and then tying it to the core values. Like you said, if it's not tied to what foundationally is what's driving, we know that in the nonprofit sector, it is challenging and rewarding, right? Often it takes longer than expected to move forward in mission with limited resources. And that also means the people that are coming alongside to say yes. And that's what it is. When someone comes into the process of even looking at and considering MAP International as a place to work, that's where it begins for them. What is this culture? And you said it. Are they walking the talk? And that is what you brought to the equation and or spoke out just now. Definitely shows the impact of the organization in a sustainable way. If not, we're here and then and we don't see it all the way through because of turnover, because let's just face it, no one has to stay where they are. That's never been the case, but even more so now than ever, right?
100%. And we see that what you mentioned about it being so hard with in difficult work with so little resources, that while I get a bit of a jump start on the mission and the why, it's not difficult to get people to buy in, right? That I feel, to use a football analogy, I feel like I get to start on the 30-yard line, whereas other organizations I've worked for have not been nonprofits, and you're having to do that foundational work to have people bought in to the reason you're there, right? That's already been done for me, right? So we don't have to do that piece. But what is a challenge is when you've been working so hard and you've got an organization full of people that just are self-sacrificial. They don't raise their hand and say, enough, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. They just keep going. And unless you're really intentional about watching for those warning signs, the why becomes a detriment because they are giving beyond what they should and what's not just feasible, but what is reasonable and healthy for the organization's sustainability.
Yes.
And so unless we are reminding people that you need to put boundaries, not just for yourself and not just because wellness is a catchphrase these days, but because for the organization to thrive, we need you to be whole. If you're not, you're going to become spent and burn out. And many people don't realize it until way too late. And so really our work comes in on that side that, yes, the why is bought in. We're good. We've got that. But it can overspend our individuals, especially when we don't have enough resources to go around.
Yes, there's no doubt. And because of going back to the core values, they have to see their leadership walking that out. They can't just say healthy boundaries. When you can see a leader saying, but we're going to take this time, we're going to step back, we're going to have this, this point of margin and allow for, and they see that, then it's not just so that we don't have this fear of, well, they say I can, but really can I? And that's, I want you to share, and you've stepped into some of this already, but if there's a specific impactful story or insight that you've seen within your leadership team and how that's walking out to really move, like you said, not just the mission forward, but in a sustainable way. And then how are you igniting that change within your staff?
So in terms of how we are trying to help with when you say sustainability, can you clarify, are you talking about within the individual or are you talking about within the organizational systems?
Well, great. Within the organizational system, which I know is going to be a tie back to that individual themselves. But yeah, let's talk about within the organizational system.
Sure. So we look at, gosh, I could pick this apart in a variety of different ways. Let's just start with talent acquisition and the
Okay.
way we look at workforce development. So I'm intentional with my senior leaders about what they need in the near term and then the long term. And they will come to me many times and ask about hiring for a certain position, but it's never about that one role. It's about how does that fit within their ecosystem of what their needs are, and making sure that what they are trying to drive and accomplish within their function is being supported by the right type of talent and staff. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that means what we need in the next 6 months is different than what we need in 12 and 24 months. And so in order to create sustainability, you've got to have a lens on not just what is the need today, but where are we headed? And then what's the ripple effect to the individuals that are connected to this role and function? And sometimes that's within their same purview and scope of their own department or division. And sometimes it has tendrils out to the rest of the organization as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so it starts with the conversations with the leaders and making sure that we're not just looking at the next quarter and the next 6 months, because there's always the immediate felt need, right? I've got to have them tomorrow. Can we just post this and move on? And my job is to slow us down and say, I get it. I understand. We're going to work incredibly quickly. But before we do that, we're going to make sure that we get the right person with the right skill set that's going to serve you in the long run. And I've never, not once, had a leader say that we took too long to go through that process, because it does create a pattern of, I guess, momentum, and it creates a
Mm-hmm.
flywheel once you understand the direction you're headed, and it paves the way. So that's one element. Another piece is compensation is another direction to create sustainability. So we, in 2022, I believe, did a 3-year visioning on what that compensation structure needs to look like, so that as the organization grows and evolves, and as the environment that we sit within changes, that we aren't going to find ourselves behind the 8 ball on how we support our staff from a compensation structure, right? And if we had not done that, the amount that we feel like we are behind now would have been sixfold. We all know what's been going on with wages in the
Yes.
last 24 months. And so while I still feel like maybe we could have done more, what we did put in place in 2022 is a 3-year strategy that we're now updating, did keep us on pace. And what the amount of turnover everyone else was experiencing, when you were hearing so much about the great
Mm-hmm.
resignation and all these people that were opting out and leaving, the amount of voluntary separation that MAP had compared to the national average was half, right? And so the impact that has on the rest of the organization and our ability to be effective and efficient in the other areas was directly related to our ability to retain staff that we desired to retain. So that is to say, it wasn't a zero number, right? There was still that voluntary resignation, but
Absolutely.
that, on pace with the rest of the organization, the rest of the nation, it wasn't
Well,
even
and what it
close.
says is that you and the other leaders were willing to have the conversation,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
That's where so
mm-hmm.
much of what we find as a challenge is when we're not willing to talk about the fact that that was the second place of sustainability that you spoke of. Is we dove into the hard conversation of pay, like
Right.
what are we, and that I'm sure compensation wasn't just salary. How
Mm-hmm,
are we allowing
mm-hmm,
and making our
mm-hmm.
employees and those stakeholders feel like we're investing in them?
Exactly
And so
right.
I say kudos.
Yeah.
There is a great amount, especially, and I've had my fair share of experiences in the faith-based nonprofit experience where that is not the case. And
Right.
too often we will say, but we're doing it for the greater good, and not it's like it's an either or and not a both and. I'm
Right.
hearing the both and that is to be celebrated.
Yeah.
That's
And I'm excited
fantastic.
about what we're going to be doing now, because we're going to be taking it forward even. And what we were
Mm,
doing to right size and to keep pace, we're now going to be taking it the next stage forward and say, we're not going to just look at nonprofit comparables to market any longer. We're now going to be looking at it more broadly, and to say, if we're going to be competing for marketing talent, if that marketing talent is in for-profit sector and that's what we need, how can we as an organization begin to get more competitive outside of our sector even? And what does it
Kudos.
take to get to 50% parity, to that. So we're beginning that work, and I'm super excited to have leadership that is, visionary in that direction. Because there is an element of sacrifice that people take on when they come to nonprofit,
That's
but we
right.
don't have to take that for granted, right? And there are individuals whose hearts are sacrificial in terms of time, but we also know that there are occasions in life where you have either children or someone that you're caring for, or you live in an
That's
area
right.
of the country where you simply just cannot even consider the rate of pay. And now there is no dividing lines between states any longer, just about when you're talking about wages.
That's
It's,
right.
for most positions, you're not looking at a local wage comparability. You're now across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got to get smarter about that. So there's a lot of work to come on that, but that's another area that we try to keep with that sustainability.
Well, you're doing it. And again, it's about bringing it to the conversation, bringing it to the table, making sure that this is staying in front of your leadership. And obviously they're there with you, locking arms. I don't, there's not this siloed us and them conversation. We've talked about this as far as the breadth and the depth of the work that you're doing. How do you manage your expectations? I've heard you talk about some time frames and, when we're talking about the short term versus the long, how do you manage your expectations in your role? And then how does that speak out into the teams that you're speaking to keep them motivated through this growth process? And it is a process.
Yes, it is. And I've got a personal answer to that. And I have an organizational answer to that. I think personally, this is my $1 million question, Wendy. How do I manage my own personal expectations when you have a very small team and
Mm-hmm.
your aspirations are large and grand? You want
Yes.
to be able to produce an HR function similar to those that I've worked in. And my previous role at Gulfstream Aerospace, I was a part of an HR function that had, I think, 100+ individuals just in human resources. And you had, event teams for HR. You had your own benefits function. You had your own tax function. You had your own payroll function. You had all of these resources. And so you had, when it came to training, there are so many things you can do. So the possibilities. And I think that's the challenge now, is that it's me and one other person internally that's driving all
Yes.
of that. And so it's constantly saying, okay, what are the most important priorities to achieve the outcomes that MAP needs right now? Right. And so looking, yes, at the 5-year strategy and
Mm-hmm.
saying where are we headed, but then that 1-year plan. And if I need to achieve that, then what elements of the different segments of HR are going to be more likely to drive it? And circling back to that each month, each quarter, and making sure that you're staying centered. It also becomes very critical to have both upward and horizontal communication on what those priorities are, and centering back to the demands that are being generated in real time. So the times that I have found myself, off trajectory, are when I allow for those whirlwinds to pull me off of center, right? And
Yes.
so then I'm trying to do both. And I'm trying to do all
Mm-hmm.
the things that I said were critical, but then the real time demands felt incredibly important. So I just add those two, right? Versus doing a really critical assessment.
Yeah.
And that has led me to some really challenging moments where I've just taken on way too much, and then I'm not delivering as much on any of the items that I need to. So for an organization, though, what we've tried to do is be very intentional about how we do goal setting. And this is
Mm-hmm.
a journey. We have not arrived. So I tell
Yes.
you the theories and where we're trying to head. And then we could probably delve into the areas that we've hit in terms of hurdles. So I don't sound like I'm preaching and I've figured it all out. But when we look at our annual plan, what we've tried to do is to then break those goals as an organization into divisional and then team level goals. And then each person inside of each of those teams is aligning to the level that's most closely associated with them. And the idea is that all of those then channel and funnel up to what the organizational functions are. And each new team member that joins MAP, we go through a goals training where the biggest theme that we set forward during that goal training is to say, this is your permission to say no.
Yes.
I don't care if you are working in our distribution center and you are picking and packing orders, or if you're a senior director for a corporate relations team. When you get good at goals and you and your manager have done your work to be clear on what those expectations are, the moment that something doesn't feel like it aligns, you're either asking questions or speaking into that situation. And we talk about how that's both a freedom and a responsibility for them in real time to use the brains and the intelligence that we hired them for to speak into that moment. And we ask them to have that courage, and we train them to use those goals to be able to help regulate the work that they're doing to ensure that it's aligned. And so that's how we try to drive it back to managing not just the expectations of the manager to the employee, but ensure that there's alignment in terms of all of that discretionary activity that happens, to limit the amount of frayed edges that then become a drag on the impact of the organization. So we are still on that journey. And so we are, looking at different things this year to try to get that more in the direction that we want to go. But that's the work that we've been on since, I think, for about 6 years now.
Well, and I love that you say it. It is a journey. You're setting some realistic expectations that we are, and it is a we. We're doing this together. You mentioned being able to have the permission to say no. Those are hard no's. We're not talking about saying no to the easy things, right? But it's so that we can say the better and best yeses for mission success and the personal development. And every time you give an answer you've been able to share today, I love how there is a tie between the organization and the individual, yourself, the senior leaders, those that are on the front line. It has to be a both and that's what I think it's lost so often in the drive for mission success.
That is the link. If people want to understand engagement, and they want to understand how to harness discretionary energy and motivation and buy-in and all of those things, that is the link. If anybody, so if there is a highlight to our discussion today, Wendy, it would be if you can help the individual understand how and why they fit and what is their unique contribution. In the training I was mentioning earlier, one thing I cover with that individual is we break out their job description and what they've learned through the first week. So my orientation lasts the first full 5 days. So it's not death by PowerPoint those 5 days. They're meeting with all of the different teams in the organization. And about 2/3 of the way through the week, we do this goals training. And so I say to them, okay, based on what you've learned about goals, what you've learned about your position and the organization, I want you to tell me, why did Matt hire this role right now? And why were you, Mr. John Smith, the right person for that position right now? Because most of our positions have somewhere between 1 and 300 applicants for one slot. And so we hired you for a reason. And what was that reason? And what is it that Matt needs out of this function right now? And so we do an exercise that forces them into connecting. What is it my skill and talent is unique to that I now understand fits in the organization in this way. And so now they not just understand the pipeline of the work and what drives our success as an organization, but what is it about them that is contributing to that as a person. So to me, that has really funneled and fueled our ability to help them see. So when we then sit down for our quarterly state of the company addresses, and we say, this is where we are in our annual goals, my hope is that each one of those people now are reflecting back to their role and they understand how it all comes together. Maybe not in all the nuances that the senior leadership team might understand, but at least to a level that they get it and they understand what their contributions are.
And they're owning it. That's what you've given them right from the beginning. Day 3 is their ownership of it. And I love that. I cannot believe that we're wrapping up here and close to the end of our time because it is so robust. And again, so much to be celebrated. You said something just a moment ago about not having it all together, right? And there are those pieces. I want to hear, as we kind of wrap up, where is that space that you and your team are finding as that major hurdle, and that you are continuing to address strategically? Because I've heard that word from you multiple times, that it's not throw it up against the wall and see what sticks, and it's not in a vacuum. So finish out by, where is that space so our audience can hear? They're going to find some commonality, I'm quite sure.
Hopefully it's not just me.
No.
Or that, but I'd say metrics and KPIs. So we have no shortage of metrics.
Yes.
But finding the ones that are critical to our mission broadly, and that each individual inside the company understands that these are the elements that we're driving as an organization as a whole, and that they're not segmented by division. Because what we're finding is, I guess, both that we need the commonality across divisions, but also that we have a better understanding of what those leading indicators are, not just the lagging. Because this points back to the goal setting drag that we've had, and why we haven't come to the end state for goal setting is because until you understand what those KPIs are from a leading perspective, and if your audience doesn't understand what that is, just what are the predictive behaviors, that if you increase these predictive behaviors, it should lead to the outcomes you desire, right? And we've been in the habit of measuring outputs versus inputs. And it's been really difficult to move the organization as a whole when we haven't had the headline metrics that drive everything. That if we aren't all aligned on those KPIs, then how do you determine what leading behaviors matter? And so we are addressing that head on as a part of our new strategic planning process that we're in as we speak. So we're going through this process with our CEO and board to set our new 5-year strategy, and developing that company dashboard is a key element to that. So fingers crossed that, that will answer a last big linchpin to this goals journey and strategy and individual contribution piece. But that would be my answer.
And I know that you're not alone in that space. I know that you're not. I mean, when we think about even our individual lives, right, the things that we're looking at and making sure, is that actually moving the needle? Right. But you have all of the right people, from what I can hear, at the table asking and answering that question. Lindsey, this has been such an inspiring conversation, and the stories that you've been able to share, I know that the audience will be able to resonate with. You gave us a behind the scenes look into MAP International. If we want to learn more, what's the best way to connect with MAP International? What does that look like?
Yes, absolutely. map.org. We have an amazing website. That's also where our careers page is. If you're ever looking for a new role, we welcome that. But on socials, we're very present on LinkedIn. We're very present on Facebook and Instagram. So MAP INTL is the handle in many of those spaces, or MAP International on LinkedIn. Please follow, share, always, always, always. Hopefully our CDMO would be thankful for that plug. So please follow us in those spaces and find us on map.org if you're interested in supporting our efforts and mission.
Absolutely. Well, Lindsey, thank you. You add your unique ingredients to the recipe of relational leadership. And so I say a personal thank you to the work that you're doing, because it just makes us all better together when we know that we are aligned in this space to encourage one another and celebrate, and also to be able to support in the areas that are challenges. And so I just want to say thank you to you today. Right?
As we were, Wendy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we look forward to, as you close out, this episode, remember to come back and to check us out for the next episodes that are out there, and to be able to share your stories. Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Before we sign off today, I want to send out huge appreciation to our listeners for tuning in. I hope you felt seen, heard, and inspired to level up your own leadership journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you're ready to level up your leadership, asking for a friend, or interested in being a guest on the show, connect with me at cultivateforgood.com. That's cultivateforgood.com. Remember, As leaders, we're either driving progress or we're driving the problem. So let's grow together.